Hey all, I'm Kel Kidman, and welcome to Breaking on the Daily, where today we begin with 3% of Nevada mail-in ballots are now in question after a survey finds defrauded voters. Now, this is a audit of over 1,400 Nevada mail-in ballots, suggesting that 2% of the ballots were cast on behalf of voters who never received a ballot in the mail, and 1% cast on behalf of voters who said they did not vote at all. This comes around the same time that we also see just yesterday, where we got a very, very small audit of 100 ballots in Arizona that showed a similar percentage of votes being tampered with. How is this not evidence? Question. How is this not evidence that there should be an investigation? That there should be an audit? Not a recount, because we've done enough of those, especially when they're just impotent measures that simply rerun the same, essentially, election counting process again, rather than actually doing an audit and actually fixing the result, not fixing the results, actually looking into it. That would be an audit. We haven't done any of those. These are just small percentages. These are just small audits. Is this not evidence for a full audit? Because if the 3% that comes from Arizona follows throughout the entirety of the rest of the election, Biden loses pretty handily. And if the 2% resides that happened in this Nevada survey, there's kind of different circumstances, but I'll get to the point. If this 3% number sticks, then it ends up winning Nevada for Trump. And we haven't seen anything out of places like Pennsylvania or Michigan. And, the most insane thing I think I've seen over the past few weeks as we've been covering this election and attempting to see what exactly is going on is the idea and the overall insistence that there must not be an audit, that we must not look into it if we don't have solid proof that would require an investigation to actually obtain. How insane do you have to be when you're expecting people who are doing this mostly on a informal way? People like the Voter Integrity Project who are doing it and are collecting evidence and are now having their evidence be observed by places like the FBI. You can't expect those people to have all of the evidence because they don't have the investigative powers that something like the FBI would, or a court would, or the legislator would. They don't have those powers. So we need to get those powers from somewhere. But the utter insistence that there must not be an investigation unless the sort of evidence that would only come out through an investigation has already been had is just simply ridiculous, and it is counter to how most things of these nature work. We certainly have enough evidence to say there is something to be looked into right now. Whether we have the amount of evidence necessary to completely prove what's happening, well, of course we don't. There hasn't been an investigation, or at least there has not been a full investigation as of yet. And this needs to be solved. You need to focus on this. It's just something that needs to be done. It's just been the most ridiculous thing I've seen since the election. It's just silly. But on to our next story. The threat to remove Chinese firms from Wall Street is now on Trump's desk. Yes. This isn't just about China, this bill. It's about the idea that... So, let me explain what's going on with Wall Street and all that stuff. So, any company that's publicly traded on Wall Street needs to be able to be audited by the U.S. government. And they need to be able to look into their numbers and look at their books and see all that sort of stuff. And here's the thing. There's kind of a loophole in this, in that if you are from a foreign actor, if you're from China, if your audit books are held in China and you're a Chinese company, you don't really need to do that, and you can still be traded on Wall Street. And you can still be traded through U.S. trading circles. You can still do all that stuff. And you can see the immediate problem there, particularly with a country like China. Now, this isn't a problem for other countries because other countries allow these sorts of companies to be audited by us. They don't limit that in any way. But with China, they demand that any company that is held essentially by them holds their audit books in China. And China doesn't allow them to be audited by the US. That's something that they disallow them from doing. And what this bill seeks to do is to limit that, which won't be a problem to any of our allies or any of the people that we actually like, people like Norway or whatever, any sort of companies from those places, because they won't have a problem with having their audit books in the US for publicly trading on Wall Street. But it will hurt China, because China has been using this strategy for a very long time. And I'm sure it's a way for them to manipulate the numbers, because pretty much everything that China does is trying to manipulate their own numbers. This isn't surprising. And to see CNN almost whine about this bill in their article is just amazing. Just read this quote. Enactment of any such legislators or other efforts to increase U.S. regulatory access to audit information could cause investor uncertainty for affected issuers, including us. The market price of our U.S. shares could be adversely affected, and we could be delisted if we are unable to meet requirements in time, JD said in filings to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. CNN says this and doesn't have anything to say about it. It just runs it uncritically. And they go on to talk about how, Beijing is dissatisfied with this. And they talk about how the bill would raise U.S. tensions and prevent Biden from doing certain things if he gets into the presidency. It's just really funny to see CNN show where their real bias is. I mean, they really are biased towards China. And there's a lot of places that are like that. And I think CNN is simply the most obvious one. It's simply silly. In recent years, they have become essentially Chinese propaganda, at least in my opinion. But on to our next story, and on from that. Austin Mayor, another hypocrisy story actually we have here for the COVID hypocrisy with elected leaders. Austin Mayor promoted stay-at-home message while on vacation in Mexico. Ooh, it's wonderful. It is so wonderful to see all of these tin pot dictators, petty tyrants, all of these sorts of people come out and show exactly what they are to the public. They are completely hypocritical. They are completely without regard to their own, to the safety of people. That's not their issue. They just want the power, man. That's all they want. They want the power. I mean, how much more obvious could it get? How much more do you need to see in order to say, yeah, these people don't care? Even if you are someone who is pro stay-at-home orders, who is pro lockdowns, even if you are, how much more do you need to see in order to say these people don't care? How much more? How much more do you need to see to say, yeah, these people just want power? You know, you might make the argument, this is necessary, yada, 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 but these guys don't represent me. How much longer do you need to see this? How many more do you need to see? That's something that needs to be, it is utterly relevant. You need to question, are these people accurate representations of what I want? Even if you are pro-lockdown, which I am not. I am not pro-lockdown in any respect. And for good reason, as the UN has now said that the pandemic, which by that they mean the lockdown, has pushed 32 million people into extreme poverty. 32 million. This has reversed a centuries-long trend of people coming out of extreme poverty because of capitalism. And now they're all being pushed back in because the government has decided to take over the economic movement of the people. Because the government has decided to fall back into old and backwards ways of governmental thinking, of ruling in such a way. Because we've been pushed back largely by China, because we've been taking all of our notes from China throughout this entire pandemic experience. I mean, just look at the whole mask thing. And the mask thing is a generally Asiatic thing. You see that happen, you see people do that in Japan, you see them do that in China, you see them do it in South Korea, but you don't see them do it in Western countries, because Western countries know better. No, it's just because Western countries don't have those sorts of superstitions. At least they shouldn't, and didn't up until this year. And there were, it's something I've always wanted to see, is a pro-mask study that wasn't released this year. I mean, tell me one that was released before 2020, and maybe I'll start believing it. But the sorts of studies that we're seeing today and we're seeing this year are obviously affected by the political climate. And you could say, oh, they're not political all you want, but that's a lie. They aren't non-political. These people are advocating for public policy, which means that they are political in the sense that politics means of the public. Obviously, any public policy is inherently political. It is the definition of the term. And you can say, well, I have a different definition, or the definition has evolved, but that's not true. Because the fact of the matter is, even if there is a separate definition, I have yet to see a separate definition of politics that is useful, that is more meaningful or more functional in terms of actually using your ideas and moving them from your brain to another person's brain. I've yet to see a better effective use of that, a better effective completion of that as a definition for politics than of the public. Of the public, it just makes sense, all right? And I am not an advocate of the idea that language, and this is kind of an addendum on yesterday's video, it's kind of an off-the-cuff thing. But to be clear, be even more clear than I was yesterday, I'm not an advocate of the whole public opinion decides what language is, because that's not true. People have this idea that language is this collective thing that everyone kind of understands inherently, and yada, yada, yada. It's all these sorts of vagaries about how we're all one people or whatever, but that's not true. Everyone has their own language. Everyone speaks their own version of English. I speak a different version of English than you do. You speak a different version of English than most of your friends do. You might speak a very similar version, and you might be speaking such a similar language that you can move your ideas from your brain to another person's brain, but it's still different, even if it's just a point of a percentage. There are still examples of people who have their own individual definitions of words, and even in the words which should be commonly understood, people do have their own individual definitions of words, especially if they don't start going to authorities like Merriam-Webster or other such dictionaries. But the point I'm trying to get at here is that what we should be going after in terms of language, and how we should be formulating our own language, and how we should be formulating our own English, is we should be formulating it around the idea that we want to be as useful, and we want the words that we say to be as useful towards conveying meaning as we can possibly do. So I'm okay with redefinitions of words if they make the words more useful. A good example of this, in terms of my own personal definitions of words, is good and not good and evil, bad and evil. Bad and evil, in terms of their traditional definitions, have almost the exact same definition, just they have different connotations. I prefer to actually separate them more specifically by saying that bad things are simply immoral things. And I'm talking about bad and evil in the moral sense, to be clear. There are obviously separate definitions of bad that don't have anything to do with morality. But bad things are simply immoral things, and evil things are things which violate the rights of other people. So, murder is evil, but something like drug addiction is simply bad. To make that sort of distinction is useful, especially for a libertarian like myself, where the distinction between bad and evil is fundamental to my philosophy. I can say, I don't want to make bad things illegal, but I want to make evil things illegal. And that's the way I conceptualize libertarianism. And I quite like that. And I have other examples, and obviously you can do other things like that. But what that is fundamentally based on, as I've stated previous, is it is based on the idea that this is a more useful version of the definition. And of course, every time I bring it up and every time I try to pontificate on bad and evil, at least with someone who has not heard it before, I will actually explain what I'm talking about and what I have redefined. It's actually very important to do that, because otherwise I'm just speaking past you. You know, if I just said, well, stealing is evil, but, you know, lying is simply bad, and I just said that without context, you wouldn't understand what I'm saying. It would be somewhat confusing if you didn't understand the definition, obviously. But once you do understand the definition, it's like, oh yeah, you understand what I'm saying. It's like, I don't want to legalize lying. I don't want to say lying is a violation of my rights or some other person's rights other than the person who's saying it. But stealing is. It's quite simple, isn't it? We got a bit off into the weeds there, so let's get back to the stories. Back to coronavirus, actually. Because Fauci is now defending the FDA's utterly ridiculous process for making vaccines essentially legal, saying that the UK didn't scrutinize the Pfizer's vaccine trial data as carefully as the FDA. Of course, I don't know how he has any idea on that subject. I'm not sure he knows exactly what the UK did in terms of actually scrutinizing the Pfizer data. As far as I know, he simply said it. And you know what? Dr. Fauci's a liar, so I don't trust him. But this whole charade has been a completely ridiculous excursion into government bureaucracy. Now, of course, a lot of this has been lessened over the past few years, and has particularly been lessened this year because of President Trump. I mean, he has limited a lot of government bureaucracy in these sorts of respects. One of the best things about his presidency, by the way. But of course, it's not completely gone. Our FDA is still completely bureaucratic and completely ridiculous in terms of what its standards are. It's just such a silly thing. He doesn't actually... I don't think he actually understands what the UK did. I don't know what the UK did. For all I know, the FDA has just been sitting on its hands for a few weeks, waiting, just being like, I don't really want to do it. And for all I know, that's what the FDA has been doing. And for all I know, the UK just fast-tracked it. In terms of like, okay, we're doing this right now. and just did it. As far as I know, that's what happened. It's such a silly thing. And I'm sure as far as he knows, that's what happened. But he's just saying it because it took less time. I mean, and if that's your standard, if your standard is, oh, it took less time, so that means it's less thorough, you're a moron. You're just dumb. Because obviously, someone who did it in less time, it did not inherently be less thorough. Obviously, they aren't necessarily, less effective. That's obviously not the case. Because time has nothing to do with it, or at least not in large respect. So long as it's in the realm of reason. For all we know, the FDA, once again, the FDA was just sitting on its hands for a week. For all we know, the UK just fast-tracked it. And not in the sense of they made it so that they didn't go through all the standard procedures, but that they put it to the front of the queue and worked on it 24/7 and made sure that they were working on it as hard as they possibly could. For all we know, that's what happened. For all Fauci knows, that's what happened. But of course, he's not going to say that because he's a bureaucrat who is intent on preserving his own job. That's his core and overwhelming incentive. That's his only incentive, in fact. It's such a silly thing. But in terms of good vaccine news, and this is something I'm actually going to praise Obama for, because when people do things that are good, even if they are people we don't like, we should at least we should congratulate them for at least that. Obama says he plans to take the COVID-19 vaccine open to televising it. This is certainly better than something like an Andrew Cuomo, someone who is openly questioning all of this stuff. Someone like a Kamala Harris. It shows that Obama, for all of his faults and for all of his radicalism and for all of that sort of stuff, he is at least politically sane. He is at least someone who is saying, maybe I should be at least a little consistent on whether I trust the science or whatever. and at least understands that Orange Man may be bad, but he's not bad 110% of the time. He's not so far gone. His Trump derangement syndrome is not so bad as someone like a Kamala Harris or a Cuomo. So I actually like this story. I actually do. And I think televising it would be a good thing. Especially since the Democrats have seemed to become the anti-vaxxer party over the past few weeks. It's such a silly thing. I mean, it really is it just shows that people like Andrew Cuomo or Kamala Harris were not interested in any sort of COVID response. They were only interested in the politicking of it. It's just entirely clear. And, I'm going to praise Obama once again, just because people deserve to be praised when they do things that are good, even if you don't like them. And let me tell you, I'm not someone who likes Obama. I'm not. I really do not like Obama. I didn't like probably a single thing he did. Like, I can't think of a single thing that he did that I actually liked. And so I'm not some kind of Obama apologist. I'm just saying this is a good move. And that's all I'm going to say. And we should be consistent on these points. We should praise people when they are doing things right. And, I think that's an important thing that we need to remember as conservatives. We cannot just say, oh, they're completely bad, because no one is that way. We need to praise people when they do things that are right. And of course, vehemently criticize them when they do things that are wrong. Both sides of this coin are both legitimate and necessary. It's something that you need to keep in mind. And it goes back to this idea that I've been alluding to, not necessarily explicitly saying, and that you should be extremely precise in your language. You need to be as precise in your language as you can be, because if you aren't precise in your language, if you do things which are imprecise, you leave openings where people can get a jab in. And conservatives are right, all right? We're right on economics, we're right on social issues, we're right on all of these things. But if we're imprecise, if we forget to praise people when they do things correct, or forget to criticize people when they do things that are wrong, then we lose the argument. Because the other side gets to get some jabs in, and they get to start saying, well, you're not following your own standards, and that sort of thing. And when we start being inconsistent with our language and with our definitions, like when we say, oh, gender and sex are the same thing, which while not necessarily inaccurate from a colloquial standpoint over the past 20 years or so, it is inaccurate in terms of a definitional sense, because they are different. The prime example being that people do not have genders. Gender, at least in its core original definition, is a linguistic thing. Words have genders. Cars, inanimate objects have genders. People, living organisms, sexually dimorphic organisms have sex, have sexes. That's the difference between sex and gender. But, of course, that was lost over time, and it has led to a lot of impreciseness in the language of conservatives today. And it's quite literally one of the biggest problems of the whole transgender argument, as I think I accurately pontificated on yesterday. But I think that's where I'm going to leave you today. This has been Breaking on the Daily. I'm Kel Kidman, and I'm out.